I know that there are some people, some politicians, who blame it all on the former guy. Trump brought us here. No. We've been in a state of democratic decline for decades. Trump was just shrewd enough to see the opportunity in our weakness. Think about it. Do we dream of a day we could go back to when we had a black president and a black attorney general? I love me some President Obama and Eric Holder, and also son of Queens, by the way. But were those the golden days of our democracy? Have we forgotten that Trayvon Martin was killed and his killer walked away with impunity? Was it not then that we watched Eric Garner choked to death by police who were never held accountable? Or that we saw Mike Brown's body in the street and Ferguson erupt as young people demanded change? When we saw one of the greatest scholars in our nation, Dr. Henry Louis Gates, arrested on his front porch? It was in those days that the Supreme Court issued its devastating decision in the Shelby County versus Holder case, punching a hole in the Voting Rights Act, that statute for which John Lewis and so many others bled. It was that case that unleashed voter suppression in the South and then across the country. Back then, there were still over 1.5 million people held in our nation's prisons and jails in largely inhumane conditions. Schools were still segregated from Alabama to New York City. We were in a housing affordability crisis. And Mitch McConnell stole a Supreme Court seat from President Obama.
That's correct.
Back then. So we're not trying to go back. I've been a civil rights lawyer for 30 years, fighting against voter suppression, injustice in our criminal legal system, racism in education and employment, so I am not nostalgic. In fact, many of the structures of our democracy that are breaking down are, if I am honest, the very structures that people like me have been fighting against for decades. So to those who only want to go back to when things were calmer and more polite, I am not with you. Because this moment is one of peril for this nation, but it is also one of opportunity. And if we are to take advantage of the opportunity, we will need power. We have a unique opportunity amid all this chaos. We have the chance to build the democracy we dreamed of. We could reimagine the public university. We should imagine how voting could be conducted to give the greatest access to those who are eligible and the greatest protection from those who would hijack our election systems. Why shouldn't the Supreme Court be held to an ethics code like every other judge?
Yes.
And not only that, why can't we challenge the Supreme Court confirmation process? So that what happened with the Tanya Brown Jackson before that committee, a woman of esteemed qualifications and decency, can never happen again. Now that COVID has opened up our thinking about the meaning of work in our lives and our effort to achieve greater balance and health, perhaps now we can better envision how jobs can be shared and what constitutes meaningful work, and why even the level that we've talked about raising the minimum wage is not good enough. Maybe now we can talk about how housing might become more affordable with arrangements that recognize that many of us are working at home as well as in an office. Perhaps now we can experiment even more aggressively with accelerated high schools for young people so that they can enter as adults with a degree in hand. What if we really did reimagine public safety? This time of democratic unraveling may ironically be our last best chance to make, at least in our generation, to make the kind of sweeping, transformative changes so many of us have said. Why? Because our minds are open like never before. Because we have seen where the fissures and weaknesses in our democratic infrastructure are, and we know that we need drastic change. Because authoritarianism, a global threat, by the way, threatens to doom us all. Because painful as it has been, everyone has seen the videos of police murdering unarmed Black people. Everyone has has seen it in this country and around the world. Because the Me Too movement revealed what women in every industry in America and around the world have been dealing with in the workplace. Because we are feeling the effects of climate disaster right now. Because we have seen the utter irresponsibility and cruelty of those who purport to lead us. We saw children separated from their parents at the border. Because we lost precious time and hundreds of thousands of more people to COVID than needed to happen. Because on January 6th, hell, even white people and conservative people, whether they want to admit it or not, saw the dangerous element in this country that is bent on destroying our very nation. But if we are to take advantage of this opportunity, we need power, and we cannot obtain power without being organized, without protecting and strengthening the institutions of our communities and retrofitting them to fight the battles we are facing. And what do I mean by that? What are the institutions of our communities? Our churches, our HBCUs. I've talked to my own AME church. You know how the week before election, just if you remember this or recognize this, just let me know. You come into your church, AME, Baptist, whatever kind of church it is, and there's some strange people the week before election. You've never seen them before, and you'll never see them again. You might see them in 4 years, right before election day. They're candidates for public office, and they come to your house of worship, and we're always very lovely. They say a few words, sometimes it's a laying on of hands and so forth, right? Yeah. So the question I have is, why can't we say, yes, you may come on Sunday, but first, we need you to come on Tuesday night for a candidate forum so that you can retrofitting our institutions. In Baltimore, where I live most of the time, when I served on the board of the library, we had to retrofit the library. Food deserts, we created a program where you could come to the public library, you could order online and pick up your fresh produce. Retrofit our institutions for the battle. I admit for my own profession that we have to hunker down and find new legal strategies to meet the moment, and we can't do that without first fixing the obvious flaws in our legal system that allow the law to be used as a gateway for the very anti-democracy project we're facing. Perhaps now we have the opportunity for change precisely because the flaws in our democracy have been revealed as dangerous, not just to Black people or gay people, but to the very nation. And our nation's weaknesses are exploited by white supremacists, by foreign powers, by professional grifters and con men. The world knows that the United States, the most powerful country in the world, has an Achilles heel. And that Achilles heel is the seductive and destructive power of white supremacist ideology. We have seen it turn people who voted for the Voting Rights Act in 2006 say they could not countenance an amendment to the Voting Rights Act in 2013. We have seen parents applaud that their son went to another state and killed 2 people. We have seen people turn themselves inside out in the service of this ideology. We have seen people, elected leaders, say things one day and then the next day say the exact opposite because of the seduction of this ideology and the power it brings. But we must realize that white supremacy is this nation's kryptonite. We will either defeat it, or the country will be doomed to become a failed state. And this is about as bad as I've seen it in my lifetime. But I have to say I'm encouraged that the polite veneer of veiled bigotry, which often left us shadowboxing, has now revealed itself to be what we always believed it was. That allows us to fight more directly. I know it's hard to believe that we can make transformative change at this moment. I know we've all grown more cynical in the last 10 years. But many of you are sitting in your cynicism, perhaps watching this on live stream from neighborhoods and homes where you would not even have been allowed to live 60 years ago, but for the determination and unrelenting imagination of people who had less reason to believe in change than we do. You were maybe married to someone you couldn't have legally married 50 years ago or 10 years ago. You graduated from a university that would never have accepted you. Many of you had eaten at restaurants that would have required you to go around back and take your food in a carry-out box just 50 years ago. In 1940, when Thurgood Marshall founded the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the organization I was privileged to lead for 10 years, his goal, along with that great legal pioneer Charles Hamilton Houston, was to break the back of Jim Crow, the system of laws in half the states of this country designed to subordinate the political, economic, and social advancement of Black people by requiring strict racial segregation in all aspects of life. There was no reason for Marshall or his colleagues to believe that it was even possible that they could overcome this entrenched system of apartheid. In fact, in 1949, 5 years before Brown, when Marshall was litigating the case he would win in the Supreme Court challenging segregation at the University of Oklahoma Law School, he couldn't even eat a sandwich in the coffee shop of the courthouse where he was litigating the case. Not only did Marshall and Houston have no reason to believe they could achieve it, they had no blueprint. They were not modeling their vision of first-class citizenship for Black people on anything they had ever seen. And don't think they saw it here in New York. When Marshall lived in New York City, he couldn't live in Stuyvesant Town, where most of the lawyers, white lawyers, lived. And so that's how he ended up at 409 Edgecombe Avenue in Harlem. Marshall and Houston created their vision and executed a plan to realize it out of their unshakable belief in the humanity of Black people. They created it out of their belief in justice. They created it out of a demand that this country be what it has for so long claimed to be. And they did it, winning Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 in a unanimous Supreme Court decision, which ended legal apartheid in this country and was the opening salvo of the Civil Rights Movement. The following year, Emmett Till was killed. The year after that, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus. Right? It was not that those people knew Houston and Marshall, Constance Baker Motley, James Reed, Fred Shuttlesworth, Fannie Lou Hamer. Let me say her name again. Fannie Lou Hamer. Robert Carmichael, and countless Black people and their allies were responsible for challenging and changing the direction of the most powerful country in the world. In fact, they turned the very idea of power on its head. This is what Black people in this country have done and continue to do. My dear friend in Alabama, Hank Sanders, civil rights lawyer and activist and former legislator, always says about the fight in Alabama. He always says they had all the police, and they had all the guns, and they had all the dogs, and they had all the laws, and we overcame them with what we had. Songs, our fears, our numbers, our truth, our determination. To that imagination and to our belief in what we can accomplish. Our mere demand to live as free people, our refusal to accept second-class citizenship, our insistence on respect for our dignity and our lives, push this country towards ever new, evolving, and improving conceptions of democracy. Dr. King said this in 1961. Black people, he said Negroes, but I'm going to say Black people, have illuminated imperfections in the democratic structure that were formerly only dimly perceived, and have forced a concerned re-examination of the true meaning of American democracy. We did that. We do that. And it's time we walk in our rightful position as founding mothers and fathers of American democracy. progressive people into believing that we don't have power. But they are actually scared of us. In fact, everything they do is a reaction to our show of power. Our power to vote, to run for office, to protest, to push our legislators and governors, to create collectives and mutual aid, and to model within our communities the way we want our government to engage with us. We have the power to use our dollars in support of what we believe in. We have the power to hold our elected officials to the fire, to show up at city council meetings and school board meetings. How many of you went to a school board meeting? City council meeting? Town hall of your senators? Okay. We have the power to strengthen our own institutions so that we need not come hat in hand to anyone when we make our demands. We have that power now. And if we're honest, as my little poll just showed, we have to admit we have not used that power to its fullest. So we have to begin first by using the power we have. But I also believe we have the opportunity within reach to marshal our power to change the very structures of the government that oppresses us. We can dismantle the filibuster. We will end cash bail and increase it connected to a rise in crime. Read the data.